two wonderful veterans of cybersecurity have agreed to come talk to us today about what's going on with AI from their perspective. And so I'm going to introduce Laura Nelson and George Barnes.
Good morning, everybody. We're going to start with some introductions. I'm Laura Nelson, the President and CEO of the National Cryptologic Foundation. I've been doing that for 5 years. Prior to that, I was a 37-year veteran of the National Security Agency, and where I worked for a long time with my colleague here, George Barnes.
Great, and I retired from NSA a year ago, September, and I decided not to be there longer than Laura, so I only stayed 36 and a half years. But we both came in University of Maryland. I was Virginia Tech, of course. She wanted to go to Maryland, but they wouldn't accept her. So that's been a lifelong, thing she's had to deal with. But she's coming around. But other than that, we both came in as double E's, and actually had a great time working together, and now find ourselves working together again at the National Cryptologic Foundation. So we both wanted to stay involved and give back, and so Laura's been giving back as the president and CEO for 5 years, and I just came onto the board in January. And so we're just delighted to be part of this community and connecting to the association, to all of you, and to the broader cybersecurity community across the country.
Yes, so you retired a year ago, and so what have you been doing, and what's the biggest, besides supporting our fabulous foundation, but what have you been doing, and what was the biggest surprise to you about going from, working the IC for all this time and then getting into, into the private
So
sector?
I was taking copious notes during the first session because I jumped out of a big, humongous place like NSA, and now I'm helping to build startups in cybersecurity. And so it was really great to listen to the dialogue because I started a year ago this next month and stood up a cyber practice in a company called Red Cell Partners that basically is an incubator or foundry for new company creation and getting them on their feet and into the market. And a couple companies existed before I got there, but our first one that has been there since I got there has just gone into the venture market after we did pre-seed investment. So just listening to the dialogue this morning and really learning a whole new world, right? And so I had been involved in tech and national security and cybersecurity my whole life. I wanted to continue doing that, but I always liked new value creation, the energy of tech, the spectrum of ages involved. I get energy from all the new adults that are coming into the workforce and how extremely intelligent they are, how much more intelligent they are than I ever was. And so that gives me energy. And so the startup world, it's been just a great thing to get acquainted with, be in the middle of, and keep me connected to this world.
Okay. Well, today we're going to focus on artificial intelligence, and over the past 2 years, we've seen an acceleration of AI technology, especially from frontier models. And so what do you see as the current trend lines from 22 to 24 when this big change has taken place? And what has changed, and what do you think the long-term implications are?
So a lot of the discussion out there in venture and even in private equity gets into, well, how big's the bubble, how long will it last? It's forever. This is a market change in a generation of how we engage with technology, really. And so if you look at just taking the models, the large language models that have been developed over the last 5 years, each one has built on prior ones, and each one, a lot of that building has been a lot of feedback. Obviously the algorithms continue to mature, but societal engagement with the technology has helped enrich those algorithms. And so between the feedback loops, the different use case applications, the raw neural network algorithms, and the compute, we are on a massive acceleration that we're really not ready for. And all of you, whatever you're doing, you're either grappling with what does AI mean for my company, for my offering, what I'm selling. If you're not doing that, you need to, because it's fundamentally part of our future. The whole concept of teaming with computers as opposed to directing them is just a substantive change not only from the standpoint of how to leverage technology, but there's the cultural aspect of how we identify, how our workforce identifies what energizes them, what intimidates them, and how we need to collectively keep ourselves in charge of technology that's getting very sophisticated.
Okay. Well, just last week, the White House released the National Security Memorandum. I'm going to read this because it's really a long
The whole thing?
title. No, it's 40 pages. But I'm going to read the title. Advancing the United States Leadership in Artificial Intelligence, Harnessing Artificial Intelligence to Fulfill National Security Objectives, and Fostering the Safety, Security, and Trustworthiness of Artificial Intelligence. That is a mouthful. But anyway, I was going to kind of talk through a little bit of this with you and see, how that relates to all of us. So one of the objectives is to maintain U.S. leadership in the development of advanced AI systems. So how do you view this rapidly changing technology for the U.S. industrial base?
So the good news is the U.S. has the greatest proportion of all the frontier models in the world. And we also have the seed corn for the technology that needs to be assembled to actually realize the potential of them. And so the harnessing high-performance compute at a size and scope that is really revolutionary is something that the U.S. almost uniquely does. Others are doing it. There are collaboratives out there offshore. Of course, China is doing it. But we need to sustain the advantage we've always had in innovation and in tech. We need to drive it, we need to own it, we need to make sure that, in this case, we look at all the repercussions because it is such a substantive change, and we'll talk about it. There are the societal implications, there are the ethics issues, there's the source data that we're relying on, and sometimes we don't know what it is. But that being said, the foundational technologies, we spent a couple decades offshoring manufacturing, and we all did that because we wanted cheap stuff. And so now we're kind of paying the pauper. We learned with COVID-19 when the supply chain shut down, all the microelectronics stopped floating to our shores, and you couldn't buy a car, much less a lot of other things. That's a big issue. The current administration had the CHIPS Act, which is really trying to bring pieces of manufacturing home. In that case, it's the big fabs, but not only trying to keep Intel viable and relevant as a global manufacturer of semiconductors, but also bringing TSMC, Samsung fabs to roost in the U.S. really is a game changer. And then the other thing is being cognizant of the size of the market that China does represent. We can't just shut down China to the semiconductors because all of our companies have become dependent on China for manufacturing, and so as well as for sales. And so we have to be very careful in the case of Intel and NVIDIA that when we create policies that preclude access to the highest tech stuff, we have to be mindful about the cause and effect of those policies on the bottom line for those companies and all the supporting industries that enable them. So it's a big deal, but technology is our seed corn. Innovation is our seed corn. Getting manufacturing back on shore is a destiny that we need to try to realize for lots of reasons, supply chain of course, but also we've undervalued a whole set of our society that can be very effectively engaged in technology, and that comes to roost in cybersecurity. You've heard Harry Coker talking recently to great effect about not needing a 4-year degree to be a competent, capable cybersecurity analyst, entrepreneur, etc. We have proved that in the government through bringing the military in, straight out of school, identifying what they have to offer and training them and applying them. And so that in and of itself is proof that that can be done more broadly. And so that all applies to how we as a country need to value not just innovation and high tech for the engineers and computer scientists, but for a lot of the others that make it all happen.
So one of the main tenets of the first objective is about workforce and talent. And so what steps does the U.S. have to take to attract and retain talent? And some of this that they talked about in the memorandum was bringing people from overseas in. So how do you see that working, and what do you think we need to do?
Yeah, I mean, a couple things that we've underinvested in education, full stop. And it's always one of these things, and what we have done kind of as a country is those of us who have had the money have voted with our pocketbooks and our feet, and we've gone to private schools when the public schools weren't good enough. And so, and I did it, I mean, a lot of us did it because of a lot of different reasons, but that really skirts the problem. And so one of my embarrassing feelings about the US is if you do the ranking of education across the world, it's pretty bad for the United States. And so if we want to be the superpower and all the good things that we've done in the past, we need to look at the ingredients, and that's growing our children, investing in our children, investing in the teachers that make sacrifices to teach our children. And so that's something, and part of my thing with the National Cryptologic Foundation is to focus on education, because that makes a society rich and prosperous and happy. And so we've got to do that. It's on all of us to take a role in it somehow. And that's just the core piece.
Yes. And so another part of this is to the infrastructure.
Yeah.
What infrastructure improvements do you think we're going to need for this
Yeah.
evolving AI technology?
So if you look at the current utilization of power for the current data centers in 2024, and then you look at the models that are actually being run, so the compute that's being stood up beyond what was stood up for the current models that we're all using, such as GPT-5 is an example. Out to 2030, the capacity we need far outpaces the supply we have. And the technology for AI compute and application is rapidly far surpassing the ability for us to stand up critical infrastructure, which takes a long time. You just saw Microsoft announce reactivating 3 Mile Island. It's because of that. So the power is a big deal. Virginia and Texas have the highest concentration of data centers in our country, and they are looking at the projections and trying to figure out how to actually match the need in those curves. And it's just, the math doesn't work right now. And so that's a big deal, again, because we have primacy globally for the raw compute and required for these frontier models. We want to retain that. And so our critical infrastructure has to come up to speed. That's also something for cybersecurity. We know, we're hearing, we're learning about actions and aspirations of those in Russia, China, and Iran, for instance, who are meddling with our critical infrastructure and trying to position themselves to hold it at risk. A lot of stuff is antiquated. Of course, the electrical power grids are privatized, so we need to be working hand in glove with the critical infrastructure sectors to modernize, ratchet down on cybersecurity, and figure out how to embrace new technologies that can bring on capacity that's also mindful of impacts on climate. So a former NSA friend of mine, Amit Singh, who I just saw last week at our NCF effort, he's working on fusion technologies for nuclear on small scale, again, to support these things like data centers. So it's a big deal.
Okay. Well, another objective of the NSM is to accelerate adoption of frontier AI systems across U.S. national security agencies and national security infrastructure. So as we think about those systems, private sector AI companies that aren't typically part of the DIB are going to be critical to developing these capabilities. And what steps should we be taking to enable these companies to participate and contribute in this area?
Yeah. So the first thing is to recognize that they are part of critical infrastructure. The current categories of critical infrastructure today include some broad categories like IT. And if you read hard enough, you can see cloud service providers and other types of things, and internet service providers kind of pocketed in there. The frontier companies are increasingly a component that we really have to care about, right? And so back in early 2023, after the first models kind of hit the market when ChatGPT came out from OpenAI in November 22, NSA and the IC started having meetings with key leaders in the 6 or 8 top companies at that time, really to get their mindset going about the fact that they just painted a target on their head. And that target, of course, was from the likes of China and Russia mostly. China who wants to pirate, Russia who wants to screw with us. And so we started engaging, and it's probably no surprise that my former boss, John Roxoni, is on the board of OpenAI right now. Former colleague Rob Joyce is supporting them. And so taking our expertise and our knowledge when we're in government and sometimes when we're out of government to help these companies stand up and understand the risks that they're living with, situate themselves better to be more defensible. And then that extends into how we actually leverage their technologies. So these technologies, that's just like generating the models, but then all of us are latching into that through APIs in all of our different services and software stacks. So there are vulnerabilities there too. And so we have to be mindful of the total supply chain of AI. That's a new, rich target for adversaries and thieves.
Okay. So one of the fun parts of our time in the government was paying attention to the legal obligations that we have related to privacy and civil liberties. And obviously bringing these capabilities into these systems may have implications. And so what kind of, how might we address that?
Yeah.
And how might the government address it? How might private companies address that?
So you remind me that I didn't finish the first question totally, because the whole thing about bringing this stuff into national security systems gets into compliance and privacy. And so on first order, as I mentioned, all of you, whatever your business is, you need to be considering how AI can make you more efficient, effective, better, more powerful. But the government needs to do that as well, including the intelligence agencies and the DoD. It's a big deal, it's hard. There are cultural issues, there are architectural issues, and then there's anxiety, there's cultural issues, just because of the fear of the unknown. The other thing we have, and dare I say in this room, we have acquisition challenges, right? And so hey, contracting is hard even today. Just think when you're trying to introduce new things that aren't that well understood. The flip side of that is there are tools now that can actually help make our jobs more efficient when it comes to doing due diligence and backstopping our proposals. Mindful that you can't just run open loop, you have to keep experts in the loop, because especially if you're just leveraging LLMs, that's dangerous. If you're leveraging things like RAG, where you have retrieval augmented generation, that actually brings the context of data sets that you have under your control to actually make their mating with the LLMs more pertainable to your use case, as well as more accurate and verifiable. And so we have to look at all the different emerging applications and derivations of AI to really understand how to leverage it for our problems. Compliance, privacy, these are big, big deals. Privacy has already come up just in the public sector with respect to not knowing whose stuff actually was vacuumed up to create those models. And that's a problem for all of us. It's definitely a problem for the government if the government's trying to make decisions and take action on data that it has no idea of the provenance of. So understanding provenance, understanding the use of the results, understanding how decisions are made by these algorithms. And so that's really where you get into, we all hear about LLMs, but things like large action models. That's a derivation that leverages LLMs and neural network algorithms to actually have more traceable decision on how a decision was made. So there's traceability, so you can actually have the right entities in the loop to really be able to backstop something that a machine did on your behalf with more autonomy. But with LLMs, you really don't know how to make the decision. You just asked it something and it answered. That can be powerful at first, but dangerous after you think about how you would use it for your business. So part of it is understanding the technology, which is more resources, more focus, but more reward. And then the second consideration is, what does that mean for privacy, compliance with law? What things will I let an algorithm do for me? Where's that line where you, as the accountable entities, have to make sure you have positive control on its use and its leverage into your business life?
Well, now we have AI, we have cybersecurity, we have an intersection of the two, and 5 minutes.
And we have 5 minutes.
Okay. So, you can answer this one quickly, and I want to what should companies, what are the vulnerabilities there? What should companies be thinking about as they...
Be scared. No. So we're not the only ones talking about this. Obviously, a lot of folks are out there sitting in China thinking about how they're going to use and how they're using all this power to be more effective in penetrating us. So they're gonna, like they have been doing, they're stealing our intellectual property, they're stealing our personal identifiable and personal health data, because they wanna know about all of humanity from a big data sense, so that they can actually be more powerful than we are. But there's a lot there, and so we really need to be mindful in totality of how we are more vulnerable on the one hand, so AI makes us more vulnerable, but if we lash it up effectively, it can help us defend better, right? And so forevermore, AI is going to be an equation on offense and defense, and so we have to recognize that we've always been in a race. The race just got faster and more technical, and so the weakest link in all of our technologies is always where the humans touch, right? And so most breaches are dealing with weaknesses in the human factor. That's going to be seed corn for AI. We all hear about it all the time. We've got synthetic personas that are spun up. They're backstopped much more rigorously with language, with cultural nuance and context. They seem extremely authentic, and so we're more prone to be had when we're busy, not thinking, unaware. And so that whole interface with humanity is going to be even more risky. And then it goes deeper into the stack, as I mentioned before, as we're using our software to make calls into LLMs and other types of referential data sets. That's vulnerability. And so we have to understand many more links in the chain than we did before. Not that we ever solved it before. Now we have more to solve. But we have AI to help us on the defensive side. So.
Okay, I'll ask one more question. So the last objective is about developing robust government frameworks to support U.S. national security, but it goes beyond U.S. Well, it is U.S. national security, but it goes beyond our domestic frameworks, and it pushes about how we work with international partners to do the same. And how do you see that evolving? It's hard to know to get ourselves in order, but how do we do that on an international level?
Yeah, I mean, so the good news is our partnerships have become we've become more and more aware of the value of our partnerships over the last years, as we've kind of gotten into this unfortunate polarity between the autocracies and the democracies. And so Russia and China are coming closer together, of course, in the aftermath of Ukraine, and China's anxiety about how we react to Taiwan. And so that's happening. And so I think it's really a matter of understanding the way the world is changing, so that we can figure out what does that mean for us.
Okay. Do we have time for questions? Oh, I didn't know if anybody wanted to ask any questions from the audience.
Sure.
There is a lot of challenges when it comes to business compliance with the existing rule of the law.
Yeah.
I'll give you one example. In financial industry, the regulations are there to protect the borrowers in case of lending, so that discrimination cannot happen. But these AI models, which are acting as a black box, that makes it very hard to be adopted in such decision where the whole purpose is to help borrower. But at the one end, there is a regulatory roadblocks created for the right reasons. So in this new world, how do we find a balance between protecting the interests and still trust this black box?
Yeah. So if anybody in here is a CISO, God bless you. So we have more regulation because society understands the stakes are higher, and the C-suite has to have its head in this game and therefore be accountable. And so the whole world of GRC, governance, risk, and compliance, those capabilities are in high demand, hot supply. Not hot supply, high demand. I've fielded proposals by people that are looking to use AI to actually help invigorate, intensify, and speed up the compliance regime. So to understand what you have, how it's acting, is it conformant, how do you report, what are the timelines? And so there are whole industries that are going to spawn off as standalones, but to the point of the first discussion this morning, as extensions on existing service offerings by the GRC providers. It's complex, and to the point of blindly taking what an LLM gives you as a response, ultimately you're accountable. And so you can't just do that, and that's why it's important to look at these other derivations, and that's why I mentioned like the RAG, retrieval augmented generation, that actually needs to have access to your data, your context, your rules, so that it can actually leverage LLMs, but in a way that is context aware and more accurate in its determinations. But ultimately, we humans are responsible and accountable. So you have to figure out, how do I harness this and all the good that it can do, but at the same time not become blindly reliant on it, and then all of a sudden you're wondering why you're in court, or worse. So it's just, we're all in this new phase of trying to figure out how to engage with this technology. The good news is, as we engage with it, the innovators are learning. The feedback loops are rich, and so with every iteration, things are getting more robust, and a lot of the weaknesses are being worked. And so that's the good news. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, thanks so much for your time. So, if you were to have on your entrepreneur hat, what do you think, what do you see as like some of the greatest opportunities at the intersection of using AI for cybersecurity? What are your thoughts around that, and where would you be focusing your attention for innovation?
Sure, that's a great question. As the first panel said, understand all the steps in the cybersecurity model. I mean, and there are a lot of steps. You can go as simple as looking at the NIST 2.0 framework, all the way to the more rigorous. But AI can support in different ways in different stages, right? And so I think the key there is figuring out what are the weaknesses in the current way we do business. How could they be, how could we have better solutions to the application and the leveraging of these technologies? Because these technologies are accelerants to business. We're moving to a point with agentic AI where you can have more autonomous action, and we're kind of at the forefront of that. You know, the science and the engineering is still maturing, and so how much autonomy you give and release from yourself is something that's going to be a back and forth dialogue between engineers, operators, and compliance. But it's coming, and so you have everything from trying to looking at the human factor, and so SOC operators are, they have a bad life because they're held accountable for all the bad things that happen. They didn't act fast enough. They're deluged with data. They have too many tools. Some data structured, some's unstructured, and so just making sense of madness. We've just layered in all kinds of solutions on these people who feel like they're downbeat. The worst thing happens Friday night when I'm supposed to be going off for my weekend finally. They probably feel undervalued, underpaid. They have lots of options, so if things are bad here, they can move over here, and so there's attrition issues. And so application of AI can help that human factor piece. It can also help, and again, with everything good comes bad. A lot of people are using AI for code generation. It's an accelerant, right? Why write your code if you can just spawn this thing off to go write your code for whatever functionality? One of the things we have to be mindful about that is, what code is it using? What are the sources? The global open source software stack is very rich with features and rich with malicious action and the potential thereof, right? And so, one of the things, one of these companies that I'm spawning right now is trying to make better decisions about what code is less risky and is from places that we are more trusted, And so not just grabbing code dynamically with AI or with software developers, but actually thoughtfully against some kind of criteria. And so AI can really help that. And the whole idea is it's like the human machine team. It needs to be an assistant in some places. We need to be thoughtful about where it can be autonomous, and always make sure that we have control over that. And then of course research and those types of things. But it can apply basically in every stage of cybersecurity, some way or shape or form. Sure.
So we are at our time, and anyway, Thank you, George, and thank you for the Cyber Association for holding this event and inviting us to participate. Appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.